Hey guys, it's Brie and Emily. We just wanted to give you a disclaimer before we dive into our episode. We don't claim to know everything, never have and never will.
We want to use this space as a platform for open discussion, and sometimes that means we might be wrong. Know that our intent is not to offend, but to learn.
And with that, let's dig into today's episode.
Mixed Messages is a podcast by Brie Graham and Emily Madigan, two mixed women trying to navigate the complexities of living between multiple communities in these divided times. On today's episode, we are continuing our conversation about colorism and introducing a new term, gatekeeping. And Emily introduces a myth that I had never heard of. Let's get into it.
I just wanted to give a trigger warning and a content warning for today's episode. We do discuss suicide and rape, so please guard your hearts.
Hey, friend.
What up, girl? How you living?
How you living? Stop. How you doing?
Good.
What do you have for me today?
So today, to get into the topic of gatekeeping, I wanted to talk about the tragic mulatto trope.
I had never heard of that. What is that? What it is? I'm sorry. Oh my God. Girl, I don't know what that is.
I didn't know what it was either. I just accidentally came across it when doing research for a different episode. And I was like, I need to know more about what that is. So the tragic mulatto trope is a myth that came out of 19th century American literature that tells a story of mixed race people suffering from depression and mental illness because of their
I thought we just called it quarantine.
I know. I thought that was just 2020. I thought that was our whole thing. But it tells the story of mixed race people suffering from depression and mental illness because of their lack of acceptance by the communities that they technically belong to. So if you are a mixed race person listening to this, chances are you're like both of us and you're thinking, well, aside from the fact that they use the term mulatto, that doesn't actually sound too far off. As a mixed race person, I have spent most of my life trying to understand the complexities of identifying as more than one race while being labeled as only the of color races. I was using air quotes, but feeling like that doesn't fully encompass my personal experiences and just being all around confused.
Oh, 100%. I feel like one community tells me one thing and the other community tells me the other. What did I tell you the other day? That I felt like I'm calling somebody and I'm on the phone trying to reach a help desk and they keep like transferring me to a different department without actually giving me any information.
Yes. I mean, maybe that's just because we've all spent way too much time on the phone with unemployment lately. I don't know. So
is this an episode about the tragic mulatto trope or is this just an episode about 2020?
Yes, and I think it's an episode of both. Okay, so though this is a common struggle for those of us who are mixed race, the tragic mulatto trope is steeped in racism and does not reveal the nuances of our situations, but rather it decides that the basis of our struggle is due to miscegenation or race mixing and the fact that we will never be able to be fully white and accepted into white society. As if that is our goal as people of color, to lay awake at night wishing we were white. Completely ignoring the fact that the reason we struggle is due to racism and anti-blackness or anti-immigrant, anti-anyone of color that oozes from the white supremacist society that runs this country.
I'm not going to act like I didn't lay awake at night wishing that I had white privilege, but I guess that's a different conversation.
Girl, don't we all? I wish I had straight, cis, Christian, male, rich male privilege. Don't we all? Did I say white? That too.
Anyway.
So let's start with the obvious slander in this trope. The use of the word mulatto.
Okay, so growing up, I was under the impression that mulatto was an acceptable way to identify.
Same.
And it wasn't until like a couple of years ago that I actually found out what the definition of this word really means.
Mm-hmm. I did too. I used to describe myself as mulatto. So mulatto with two T's means a person of mixed white and black ancestry, especially a person with one white and one black parent. It stems from the Spanish word mulatto, I don't know if it's said the same or not. I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish. It stems from the Spanish word mulatto with one T, which means a small mule. Now, a mule is, in fact, a sterile offspring of a horse and a donkey. An animal who, due to the mixing of two different species, has chromosomes that don't match up and therefore can't produce sperm or eggs, making them sterile. So comparing mixed race people with mules is inviting in the notion that white people and black people are of two different species and therefore should not mix, aka miscegenation.
Also, I don't feel like it should be lost on anyone that the two offspring are a horse and a donkey, because I feel like that's implying that the white group or the white community is the horse and the black community is the donkey.
Now, the term mulatto was coined well before the 19th century, which is when the tragic mulatto trope entered American literature, seemingly by a white author named Lydia Maria Child. Child is known for writing the quadroons and Slavery's Pleasant Home. Child is what I would like to call a problematic fave from what I read about her. So Child was an author who had written a few novels and a subscription-based children's magazine and had quite a following. When she was introduced to William Lloyd Garrison, who was doing his own work fighting against slavery, she was intrigued by the concept of anti-slavery, but was hesitant. She wanted to have all of the information before she co-signed that idea, so she did her research. And
I mean, so far so good.
I mean, I wish she would have just like been on board. Like, I don't understand how anybody can be hesitant about dismantling slavery, but I digress. So according to her peers at the time, she did the damn thing. She published the first book-length anti-slavery work called An Appeal, which was, and I quote, painstakingly researched. An Appeal was unique, not just in its thoroughness, but in the topics it addressed as well. So An Appeal touched on topics like racial prejudice in the North, the difficult position of female slaves in relation to their white masters, and questions around integration and interracial marriage, which were all topics that even the abolitionists weren't openly discussing yet. Child, now an abolitionist herself, lost a lot of her following and subscribers to her children's magazine, though it appears that that did nothing to change her course of action to continue to speak out against slavery. So, what did Child write about that created the tragic mulatto trope? To give you an idea, I'm going to give you the Sparks Notiest of Spark Notes version of the quadroons. There was a white man who fell in love with a mixed woman. They could not get married and have it recognized by the state, but they did it anyway. They had a daughter, mixed but white passing. White man loves his mixed wife, but gets politically ambitious and sets his eyes on the white daughter of a colleague, knowing that marrying her would raise his standings in the community. He decides to marry the white woman without telling his mixed wife, though she finds out the week before. It's a very sad moment where she graciously tells him goodbye. They share a final kiss. He regrets his decision immediately, but also realizes it's too late, and he leaves. He marries that white woman, who hears him say someone else's name in his sleep, and at one point, they ride past his ex-wife and their daughter. White wife sees white man's reaction to seeing this beautiful mixed woman and her daughter, asks around, and finds out that he has been married, and I guess still was married to that woman. Mixed woman dies a year after white man marries white woman, apparently due to sadness, leaving their daughter alone. White man decides to take care of daughter, keeping her safe in the cottage that she has lived in all of her life, paying for tutors and caretakers. Daughter's harp teacher falls in love with her. They get married. When he's out of town visiting family, someone finds out through recently released documents that she is, in fact, black, and they arrest her and sell her to the highest bidder immediately. Harp's zaddy husband finds out, comes home, tries to rescue her, is killed in the process, and she ends up killing herself by slamming her head repeatedly into a wall, thus creating the tragic mulatto trope. The idea that a mixed race person, usually a woman with black and white lineage who is white passing, if found out, is doomed to be exiled from white society, thrown into a life of misery and woe, and therefore becoming sad, depressed, and suicidal. Many stories of the tragic mulatto in years to come end with the subject killing themselves. Oftentimes, the protagonist is someone who either doesn't know of their African lineage or is actively trying to hide it. Some are even portrayed as evil, willing to do anything to stay hidden in the comforts that their proximity to whiteness has allotted them. Now, this narrative did shift with the 1998 novel Caucasia, written by Danzy Senna, which focuses on a young biracial person who can pass for white, but who is proud of her blackness and takes action to connect to that part of herself. In the novel, the tragic part is fueled by her parents' dysfunctionality instead of her plight to discover where she belongs. Now, I have not actually read that book, so I'm just going off of what I read online, just as a heads up. Another stereotype that comes along with the tragic mulatto trope is the trope of the Jezebel. Jezebel, defined by Merriam-Webster, is 1, the Phoenician wife of Ahab, who, according to the account in 1st and 2nd Kings, pressed the cult of Baal on the Israelite kingdom, but was finally killed in accordance with Elijah's prophecy. Or 2, often not capitalized, an impudent, shameless, or morally unrestrained woman, aka me. In 1993, sociologist Kay Sue Jewell conceptualized the Jezebel as being a tragic mulatto, having, and I quote, thin lips, long straight hair, slender nose, thin figure, and fair skin, end quote.
Honestly, that sounds like a white woman to me.
Okay, period. Now, this is not to say that mixed folks are the only ones to be hypersexualized and otherwise treated as some sort of fetish. In fact, our darker-skinned sisters and gender nonconforming folks have been stereotyped as Jezebels as well, and this part of the trope erases that part of history of the sexualization of Black bodies in this country. And Jewel's description, like you said, Brie, sounds like her version of the Jezebel and what her idea of what is attractive to the white community, a mixed person with white features, right? Some believe that Jewel's concept of the Jezebel comes from the fact that many of the slaves that were sold into prostitution were, in fact, mixed through something called the fancy trade, where mixed-race female slaves were sold as fancy maids to be fetish objects of white male desire. It was focused primarily on lighter complexion slaves because of their visible representation of the rape of their ancestors and the reminder to the white men purchasing them that rape was part of their patriarchal rite of passage. If you think we aren't going to do an entire episode on the fancy trade, you are sadly mistaken, because I had never heard of it before and it is not often discussed.
Come on, previews for next episodes.
Give y'all a heads up where we're going to be going. So there's also this idea that many free mixed women became willing concubines to wealthy white men in the South to help them support their children, all of whom had been denied by their white fathers. So these agreements or civil unions were said to be instigated by the quadroon balls in New Orleans. Now, for those of you who don't know, the quadroon balls were said to be gatherings of wealthy white men and free Black women, many of them mixed, where the swooning woman of color, another trope, would be chosen by her white knight to be taken care of financially in exchange for a life of sexual servitude. Now, there is very little evidence historically to show that these balls actually happened. There has been at least one advertisement found from that era for one of those quadroon balls, but nothing else to show that they are more than a white man's fantasy. Is that to say that they didn't happen? No. For example, at that time, there were very few, if any, dance halls that would allow free or enslaved Black people to enter. Not to mention, closer to the Civil War, there were even curfews put on to free and enslaved Black people. I would also like to point out that many free women of color in New Orleans didn't need support from wealthy white men. They were actually a very powerful and influential group despite their very limited rights. They had no need and probably often no desire for white men and their money.
Okay, period.
A civil union between a white man and a free Black woman was called a placage. I think I'm saying that right. It's French. I don't know. And was a legally binding contract that was used in place of a marriage license because such unions were wildly illegal. From what I could tell, many of these placages were gone into willingly. So if you were a white man falling in love with a free Black woman and vice versa, this was the only way to legally bind your union, as marriage was not legal. The tragic mulatto trope is not a thing of the past. It now has a different name, according to some. Some believe that identifying as biracial or multiracial is a new age version of mulatto, and that these identities are used to separate ourselves from our Blackness. Look, I know that we will never please everyone. I have always identified as Black, and I always will. But I am painfully aware that though my experience is still a part of the Black experience in America, I have immense privileges due to my proximity to whiteness and the fact that I grew up in an all-white family. My identification as multiracial is also to acknowledge my Latinx lineage as well. Just a side story. I once had a conversation with a cousin of mine who is white about a post I had made on social media. In the post, I had pointed out that I am a Black woman, that I'm a Puerto Rican woman, but I will never identify as a white woman because we have simply not been allowed to claim that part of ourselves. Not being able to claim that part of ourselves is not the same as desiring to, because we think it's better to be white, so you can miss me with all that. But my cousin asked me, how do you think it makes your mom feel to see that you don't claim being white? To which I replied, I know how my mom feels about it because we talk about it. My mom gets it. My family gets it. They know that my experience differs from theirs, but what I need everyone else to understand is my experience also differs from that of the Black community in many ways. The identity of being biracial or multiracial or mixed for me is not me trying to separate myself from my Blackness, but to respect my Blackness by acknowledging that I will never fully understand that struggle either. Like our queen Salt and Pepper said, opinions are like assholes and everybody's got one. So I identify how I identify because that is what has been given to me by others. And I choose to continue to identify as all parts of my complicated identity because my identity is complicated. Don't put me in a box. If you call me Black, cool, I'm Black. If you call me mixed, cool, I'm mixed. Don't downplay my existence by telling me that my many identifications are a way to separate myself from my Blackness. What sent me off of that rant just then is I read this article. I think it was from somebody who wrote for The Root. I'm not entirely sure. I can't really remember.
We'll find the link and we'll put it on our website.
Yeah. So this author who is a biracial man but identifies as Black was talking about how the tragic mulatto trope is alive and well, and how he thinks that the new form of the term mulatto is mixed or biracial, and that people who claim mixed or biracial are claiming that to separate themselves from Black. Like, no, I'm not Black, I'm mixed. I'm not Black, I'm biracial. And how that is their own anti-Blackness. And it really pissed me off because I'm not identifying as biracial or multiracial or mixed because I don't want to be identified as Black or because I don't want to be associated. I'm doing it because, like I said, I understand that my struggles and my life experiences differ from that of somebody who identifies as fully Black. Not only am I multiracial, but I also grew up in an all-white household, in an all-white community. And so my experiences are different. I know that I will never understand what it truly means to walk through this world as a Black person. Trust me when I say my experience is very different than those who are like, I have experienced X, Y, and Z because I am Black. I have not experienced probably X, Y, or Z. I probably only experienced A, B, and C. I haven't made it through the whole alphabet because my proximity to whiteness has kept me protected from the X, Y, and Z. Do you know what I mean? I was so hurt by that article.
What a perfect and prime example of gatekeeping.
Yes.
So for those of you who are not familiar with the term, gatekeeping as it pertains to race can be defined as when someone takes it upon themselves to decide who does or who does not have access or rights to a community or an identity.
I actually found that a definition on Reddit and I really liked it. So don't shame me.
I'm not mad at you. I'm not mad at you for pulling that. I feel like that's really important. And that's exactly what that author was doing to biracial people. Mm-hmm. He was trying to tell us that we are not allowed to claim A experience because we are B experience. Mm-hmm. And if we claim A experience, then we are traitors, or we are not really a part of, or we are ashamed of the community, which is not true at all. So the reason that we wanted to talk about gatekeeping, if you listen to our Sally story episode, you know that we talked about colorism. Well, gatekeeping, in our personal and very humble opinion, is the other side of the colorism coin. I mean, essentially what they both do is keep people of the same community separate from one another for one or for many reasons.
An example of gatekeeping would be someone telling us that we are not allowed to speak on Black issues because we are mixed. Another example would be someone telling a New Eurekan that they are not Puerto Rican because they didn't grow up on the island.
But also another example is like what we do to ourselves when we say, well, we don't get to fully experience X, Y, and Z because we don't know this. And it's a really thin line between awareness and respect and gatekeeping, right?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
And it obviously goes towards other communities as well. For example, a white person telling a mixed person that we don't really count because we're not really Black. That's gatekeeping.
Or basically all of white society deciding that the one drop rule is a thing. That is all gatekeeping, right? And I think it's super important to talk about this other side of this mixed race coin that we have been handed, because it's part of our confusing existence. Part of our confusing existence is being told by people who look like us that we aren't allowed in. Like Bree, you've brought up before that when you were younger, you would have other Black girls tell you that things like you think you're cute because you're light, or deciding that you weren't Black enough because they didn't think your ass was big enough or whatever. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So in like, I think it was like my sophomore and junior year of high school. Well, first of all, my freshman year of high school was the first time that I had a group of BIPOC friends, literally the first time ever in my life. And I remember an effect of having my first group of BIPOC friends led me to one, and this was great, like understanding more about Black culture. But then within that, I felt like there were a lot of people that I had surrounded myself with at that time who were telling me, oh, I think I'm cute because I'm light skinned, or you'd be cute if you straighten your hair. How come you wear your hair curly? You should straighten your hair. Well, you're not like, what do you know about Blackness? You grew up in an all white household. You don't know XYZ. And so I would do things like, and I like really hate to admit this, but we're all about transparency on this podcast. But I would do things like wear baby fat or Rocawear. And I would start wearing clothing that was like specifically branded towards the Black community and BIPOC communities so that I could feel closer to the Black community.
I did the same thing.
Because people were literally people were at the gate, like preventing me from coming in. And I was like, okay, but like, what if I wear this Rocawear tracksuit? Like,
right.
And they were like, yeah, maybe a little bit, but still your ass is flat and you should probably straighten your hair and you're still not one of us.
Girl, the bouncer at the gate, the only reason they let me in when they realized I could dance.
Mine was that I could sing. Literally, I remember in high school, in between periods, this group of Black girls came up to me and they said, you think you can sing? And so I sang Mariah Carey.
Yes, bitch. Yes. Shout out to Mariah.
I obviously sang Mariah Carey. And that was like my pass. That was like my thing where if I'm going to have any claims to the community, I have to like bring something with it too.
And that sucks. And it's really, really hard to deal with that. And it's not just mixed people who deal with gatekeeping either. For example, one of my best friends who identifies as Black and not multiracial spent most of her childhood being called an Oreo because she was smart and articulate and listened to rock music. Now, it's important to keep in mind that like those were thoughts of children who had internalized the anti-Blackness of our community by associating intelligence and vocabulary with whiteness. Like that always confused me when I would hear that. I was like, so are you saying that because you're Black, you're not allowed to be articulate and intelligent? I was like, the most articulate and intelligent people I know are Black. Like, but right. You know, when that's what kids were doing. Yeah, it was rough.
It's following like this list of stereotypes. And if you do not perpetrate behavior within that list of stereotypes, then people feel like they can gatekeep you and remove you from your connection to the community because you are not sticking within that list. And
right.
That brings us into code switching, which takes on a whole new meaning for mixed race people. We code switch everywhere. And that is not
everywhere.
Like, I mean, everywhere. That is not an understatement. And not just with white people, but with BIPOC folks too.
I can't tell you how many different versions of myself there are.
Girl.
Like, truly. I have been made fun of. It gets pointed out to me a lot that sometimes I sound real hood. And it's not an act either. A lot of people assume it's an act.
But that's exactly what I mean. Like, we're always having to switch it up just to feel accepted. Like, the bare minimum of like what we're allowed to be like of ourselves. It's taken me so long in my life to figure out who I was, stripped away from all of the other influences in my life. And that's, I mean, just for anybody to find their identity, it takes a journey too. But when yours is solely based around your race, or at least when yours is heavily based on your racial identity,
yeah,
and you still don't have the answers, it's really hard to be able to navigate truly who you are.
So I have not actually been personally gatekept outwardly and aggressively from anyone in the Black community as an adult, but the kids that did, they really did a number on me. You know what I mean? And because of that, I now gatekeep myself.
Oh, girl. Well, first of all, I can't keep track of all of the microaggressions that I've experienced in my life. And I don't know if it's accurate to say that I've experienced microaggressions from the Black community. I don't necessarily know what that terminology would be, but I've definitely experienced it like on both sides.
Right. Like minor gatekeeping on both sides.
Right. But a lot of it has been because of myself.
Yeah. Yep. Me too. Just afraid of being wrong, afraid of not fitting in, afraid of people thinking that you're trying too hard. At least for me, that people think that I'm trying too hard. Or so I always gatekept myself because I was like, the last thing I want to do is piss people off.
Oh, girl. I mean, even if we're talking specifically in the instance of this podcast, like, I know I came to you several times terrified that in an attempt to be unifying and equitable, that this podcast would be seen as divisive. And I was really apprehensive and anxious that someone would tell us that we don't have the right to speak on these things. The truth is, like, that might be true, but I don't want to gatekeep myself, nor do I think it's acceptable for anyone to gatekeep us from talking about this, and for at least sharing our experiences and trying to help other people and trying to help ourselves be educated on the topics, you know? I mean, if we're being honest, I'm still terrified that we're going to end up upsetting or disappointing somebody, specifically within the Black community, because it's a community that I really wanted to be a part of. And I really wanted to identify within. And not because people told me I should identify within it, but because I actually do feel like I identify within.
Right.
We already felt a large amount of shame when we first had our new awakening about Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party and the true injustices that were happening within police brutality. We felt so much guilt when we first realized that when we were in our early 20s. Something that I'm really trying to be aware of is that other people are just getting to that place that we were just getting to. And I don't want to gatekeep those people from learning and understanding.
Right.
I think there are people that experience that gatekeeping in their first awakening that feel like they are not allowed to learn, or that they should keep their questions and comments to themselves because they don't want to be offensive. And that's not going to help either.
Right. To piggyback off of that, it is scary. It is terrifying to speak about very real things and situations and experiences that we have personally had that may come off as anti-Black, but it's not. Just because there were individuals who happened to be Black that said X, Y, and Z to us, it's not lumping everybody together. But those individuals were hurting and were taught by society and by their family that whiteness means danger.
Yeah.
And so to protect themselves, they needed to keep anything that resembled whiteness at bay. And that includes us. And the white community at large and white supremacy, it treats us, keeps us at arm's length because of our proximity to Blackness. Do you know what I mean? So like we're constantly being pushed and pulled into our own little hidey hole, and that sucks. It sucks to feel separate from everybody because of our proximity to everybody.
Right. You know, if I'm being fully transparent, I'm really ashamed to admit this. Emily, I'm wondering if you remember this. It was a couple of years ago, and we were having a conversation at one of our friends' house about race, and somebody had asked a question about identification, and I remember outbursting and saying, I'm not Black. I don't identify as Black. And it was because at that time I was having my whole world turned upside down, and I did not have the language to be able to identify that I didn't identify within the Black community because of the lack of experiences that I had had. I had experienced a lot of privileges that allotted me closer proximity to whiteness, but that didn't mean that I'm not Black.
Right.
And I'm looking back on that experience now and seeing that I was literally in that moment gatekeeping myself because I did not have the verbiage to be able to understand. I didn't have the verbiage, and I didn't have the knowledge to be able to understand and process fully what I was feeling. But that is the complexity of being biracial, is that you don't experience the same things that either side of the communities that you are experience. So how can you really identify as one or the other when none of them seem like the thing that you really are?
Right.
To be very clear, I identify as Black. I identify as biracial. But at that time, I just did not have the terminology that I felt like I needed to be able to describe where I was at.
Right. Like even the term gatekeeping. I was using the term colorism correctly and incorrectly because I was like, what's the term for when we're also not accepted by the Black community? Like what is that? And I kept being like, I'm like, reverse colorism doesn't sound right. That sounds like reverse racism, which is not a thing.
Right.
So I was like, it can't be that. So maybe it's just another form of colorism. When I discovered gatekeeping literally a couple months ago, I was like, yes, there it is. Because I didn't have a term for it. But like you said, it's hard to know the correct verbiage to describe our experiences because no one has really tried to describe our experiences yet.
So now that you know about the tragic mulatto trope and you're understanding words like colorism and the difference between colorism and gatekeeping, use that terminology in your arsenal to fight against racism and arrest the killers of Elijah McClain.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Mixed Messages. For more information, check out our website at mixedmessagespod.com. If you like what you hear, leave us a review. The more reviews we get, the easier it is to get our message out. Follow us on all social media platforms, and for extra content, join our Patreon. Thanks for listening. See you next week.